It's funny how we think we know a story, right? A classic like Shakespeare's Hamlet. We've got this image of the melancholy prince, lost in thought. But what happens when that story crosses borders, when it gets retold in a completely different culture? Well, it turns out the Prince of Denmark has lived some wildly different lives. And today we're going to explore one of his most radical reinventions, right in the heart of the Arab imagination. Okay, so let's just jump right in with a version of Hamlet that is, truly revolutionary. This one comes out of Morocco in the late 1960s, and trust me, this is not the prince you read about in school. So, in this 1968 play called Ophelia is Not Dead by Nabil Lalu, the entire core of Hamlet's character gets flipped on its head. Think about it. Shakespeare's prince is paralyzed by his own thoughts, right? He's trapped in his head. But Lalu's Hamlet, he's punished for his actions. The paralysis isn't some internal struggle. It's a very real external punishment that's forced on him because he refuses to sit back and think. And this is a huge deal. You remember the famous mousetrap scene where Hamlet puts on a play to subtly hint at the king's guilt? Well, forget that. This Hamlet doesn't hint. No, he stands up right there in front of everyone and directly accuses the king and his own mother of murder. He acts decisively and immediately. And for that, he gets punished. So you gotta ask, right? Why? Why make such a massive change to one of the most famous characters ever written? What was going on in the real world that made it necessary to turn this thoughtful prince into a man of action, a political prisoner? Well, the answer isn't just about art, it's about politics. You see, this young Hamlet wasn't created in a vacuum. He was forged in the fire of a very specific and very intense political climate in Morocco. The playwright Lavlu was writing during this really dark time in Moroccan history called the Years of Lead. We're talking about an era of brutal state repression. Dissent was crushed. Free speech wasn't just a right you had. Trying to exercise it was an incredibly dangerous risk. So how did the regime enforce this silence? One of the key tools was a system of detention called garde à vue. This basically gave the state the power to make people disappear. They could hold political prisoners forever, with no charges, no lawyers, no contact with their families. This wasn't some philosophical paralysis. This was real, physical, political isolation. And just like that, it all clicks into place. Lalu's choice makes perfect, chilling sense. His Hamlet isn't paralyzed by indecision. He's paralyzed as a punishment for deciding to speak truth to power. The whole play becomes this powerful metaphor for the artist, for the intellectual, who is silenced and locked away just for daring to tell the truth. But here's the thing. This wasn't just happening in Morocco. Lalu's rebellious prince was actually part of a much bigger, region-wide conversation about who Hamlet was and what he meant, a journey that pretty much mirrored the Arab world's own chaotic political story. You know that iconic line, to be or not to be? Well, in this new context, it took on a whole new level of meaning. It stopped being about one person's private despair and became a massive, urgent question about the very survival of the Arab nation itself, especially after the huge shock of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. And you can really see that shift right here. It goes from being this personal, internal dilemma of one man to a collective political crisis for an entire people. The question wasn't about whether one man should live or die. It was about whether the whole pan-Arab dream would survive, to be or not to be. In fact, we can track this whole evolution across 3 really distinct phases, and each one tells us something about the changing political mood of the modern Arab world. Okay, so phase 1. In the 50s and early 60s, during this period of revolutionary optimism under Nasser, Hamlet was basically a cultural benchmark. If you could perform Shakespeare and perform it well, it was a way of proving that your nation was modern, was world-class, and deserved a seat at the global table. Yeah, he was treated with this incredible reverence. He was a symbol of high art, a challenge to be mastered and presented perfectly. It was a point of national pride. And then, 1967 happened. The military defeat was devastating, and it just shattered all that optimism. Suddenly, sitting around and thinking felt like a waste of time. The culture didn't need a philosopher, it needed a hero. And so Hamlet was drafted into the revolution. He became, and you've gotta love this quote, a Che Guevara in doublet and hose. I mean, how great is that? This new Hamlet was all action. He was a freedom fighter taking on corrupt tyrants, both at home and abroad. There was zero room for hesitation in this version, just a relentless drive for justice. But that revolutionary fire couldn't burn forever. When it became clear that the big changes people were fighting for weren't actually coming, Hamlet's character, well, it shifted again, reflecting a new kind of disillusionment. So now we're in phase 3. Playwrights started using Hamlet, but this time with a heavy dose of irony. He became this kind of ghost from a more heroic time, a figure used to show just how powerless and ineffective the new protagonists were. The great hero was now a sarcastic reminder of what could have been. I mean, what do you do when revolution fails and you can't actually change the world? Well, these later plays suggest that maybe the only power you have left is to just laugh at how absurd it all is. Hamlet's story became a way to mourn a dream that died, and dark humor was the only weapon left. So when you lay it all out like this, you can see this incredible arc. The exact same character goes from being a symbol of high culture to a political firebrand, and then, finally, to a sarcastic ghost haunting a failed project. It's just amazing. So what does this whole journey really tell us? What does it say about these timeless classics that we're supposed to revere? Well, it seems they're not so timeless or fixed after all. There's a critic, Graham Holderness, who has this perfect phrase for it. He calls a text like Hamlet a site of cultural production. I love that. It's not some dusty artifact in a museum that you're not allowed to touch. It's more like a quarry. It's a rich source of raw material that every new generation can dig into and use to build something new, something that speaks to their world. And that is exactly what people like Lehlu were doing. They weren't just adapting Shakespeare. They were taking him apart. They were slicing up his lines, shuffling his scenes, mashing his characters together, and using the pieces to build their own stories. They were talking back to the canon, rewriting it to make it their own. So this incredible journey Hamlet took through the Arab world is such a powerful reminder, isn't it? It shows us that the great stories are never really finished. They're alive. They're in a constant conversation with the present, just waiting for the right artist at the right time to give them a new, powerful, and urgent voice. Makes you wonder, what other stories that we think we know are just waiting for their next rewrite?